Welcome to the Third Party Risk Perspectives podcast series, hosted by Blue Umbrella and AML RightSource. This episode is entitled Beyond Legal Risks in Third-Party Risk Management. We're focused on helping companies manage their third-party risks with technology and due diligence research. During the series of podcasts, we've tapped our internal subject matter experts to provide their views on core concepts and topics related to building and improving compliance programs. Thanks for listening.
My name is Christopher Sindick. I'm the Director of Third-Party Risk and Due Diligence here at Blue Umbrella, and I'm very happy today to be joined by one of my colleagues and friends, Massimo Bronzetti. Massimo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Chris, for the introduction. I'm Massimo Bronzetti. I graduated in law. I have a legal background, graduated in Italy, and then I attended a master in sports law and management in Barcelona. And I've been joining the AML and Blue Umbrella team recently. And I've been working in the industry for more than 6 years. And before, I was working in the legal industry.
Thanks for your overview of your background there, Massimo. And I know you come from a very diverse background and have seen a lot of different things in your career too, which is, why I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspective on today's topic. Again, it's looking beyond legal risks and third-party risk management. What I'm seeing in my career, and no doubt you and our listeners have seen the same thing, where a lot of times companies, when they're starting to go down the path of third-party risk management and compliance and legal and ethics, it really does start with a focus on the legal risk, the baseline requirements, the legal requirements, those sort of compliance failures that come with a lot of zeros behind them and a lot of heartache too if a government regulator would come knocking. But we've seen recently more of a focus on reputational risks and other things like that, with the focus on the due diligence process typically being on legal risk, things like bribery, fraud, sanctions, areas like that. What else should organizations be thinking about today that maybe they weren't thinking about 10 years ago or 5 years ago or just last year?
That's a good question, Chris. I must say that for my experience, one of the most important aspects might be taken into consideration that our clients, maybe sometimes they're not even aware that are reputational concerns, because sometimes the reputational concern might be even more severe than the criminal liability itself. Now, with the social media, risk of the reputational damage is much higher than before. I can say that now reputational risks are a big, severe aspect that we might take in consideration, where like screening the third party for the clients. Also because the reputational concerns is something that, as said, with the arrival of social media, it's really something very difficult to control. And sometimes, I would say most of the times, the reputational concern much bigger impact than a criminal scandal. Because just to make an example, the average duration of a criminal trial from, let's say, the preliminary investigation phase until the ruling of the Court of Cassation in Italy takes, as an average, about 4.5 years. So it means that even if the company will be acquitted of all charges, it will take a lot of time to be formally acquitted. And the reputation of the scandal that goes in newspapers is something that goes immediately and will create a huge reputational impact for a possible dealing with that person or with that company. This is something that our clients might really bear in mind, especially if the person is well known or the company, I would say.
And I think you've hit upon one of the really important points there too, which is that the courts of law can move very slowly, but the court of public opinion moves at light speed. You don't want to be, trending online, going viral for the wrong reasons, when people can turn on an individual or a company relatively quickly when there are some of those serious allegations that come through. And I think it's something that, although there may not be as many of those kind of legal risks involved with them, the damage to the brand, product sales, boycotts, things like that are definitely consideration that are real, that people need to think about, specifically as it relates to their third parties that they're working with. A lot of times the media, if there's a reputational concern, they won't always name and shame the small third party, the supplier, distributor, agent, reseller, etc. They'll go after the bigger name, putting the name of the large company in the headline to garner a little bit more attention to them. Again, the notion there being that companies are on the hook a lot of times for their actions of their third parties, not only legally, but reputationally as well. And I think that brings us to another question, which is who cares about the reputational risks? If there's a failure or there's a concern or a new media story that pops up or a wave of public attention, who's paying attention to that? Is it specific to certain industries, parts of the world? What are you seeing in that regard?
I can say that the reputational risks are even more prone to severe consequences rather than the outcome from the criminal liability itself. I can say that like public investors, they do care about reputational risk because what they really want to know if their money are safe for investment or maybe there are risks for, I would say, boycott or the so-called reverse boycott. And in the same way, investors do care about what the public as I said, during especially with the social media period, like the public opinion, they tend to create a sort of hype on the reputational concern related especially to the corporation. So I should say that the public investors and the public itself, the public opinion, really interested about reputational risk, especially I can say on the industry that can create public scandals. For example, environmental issues, animal testing. So something that the public opinion do really care and something that or the environmental footprint. So something that is really easy to create an hype on social media, especially during this transition for reducing the carbon footprint on the planet. People do care more about taking care of the environment, on animals. This, I would say, is really crucial, especially, but not just limited with this industry and stake. For example, I would say that also there's a big difference between EMEA and APAC regions, because maybe on APAC regions, I do care more with something related on the reputation for unfair working practices or selling in certain markets. They are more exposed to sanctions or violations. And on EMEA, for my experience, I see they're more related with some issues related with product failure or quality issues, or maybe data breaches, or an industry where a lot of licenses are needed in order to work it. So it's a really complex matter. I know it's not easy to summarize everything in just a few minutes, but there are very many different of way of reputational concerns depending on the industry, the client, the third parties working, and also let's say, on which industry they're working with.
And certainly if we look at some industries that are a little bit more focused on selling to consumers directly as opposed to business, that's one where the reputation can have more of an impact, or the view of the reputation and the brands. If people just stop buying, it's something that can be done overnight as opposed to a long-term contract that has to expire. And I think too that as we look at that, we have to say, why does it matter? What are some of these risks that companies that should be taking into place now, and how do they uncover them? Certainly in our role here at Blue Umbrella, we're conducting research and we're trying to find out about these reputational risks that third parties will present to our clients and making them aware of them so that they can remediate as appropriate. And we've heard feedback about how our reports are really taken to heart, and some clients will not work with third parties based on some of the findings that are there about various types of misconduct that we've discussed so far today, connections to some of these concerning activities too. But why do they matter? What are some of the risks that you're seeing more so in your course of business?
I can say that they do really care because they're really more aware and conscious that a reputational concern might be very critical for their operation for their business. And as you correctly said, people would stop buying a specific brand because of this scandal. And it's really easy. We saw from the experience that even just a reputational scandal can really cause a real crisis for the company that is involved in this scandal. Even if at the end will be completely acquitted, but the public opinion, it's now impact on the reputation on the company. And with social media, it's really easy to create a huge damage on the company. And that's why also we have in our reports, it's something to check the most is the reputational concern from all the aspects we already touched. Just to make a summarize, we have different level of scopes in our reports that, of course, they have the lowest one. They do really check just on the surface about reputational concerns, and others, they go on deep dive on this possible risk. Mm-hmm. So it depends also how much the client is interested considering the industry the client is working, because as I said before, some industries, some regions are more sensitive to a possible reputational concerns. And as I said, usually this affects almost all the corporations are dealing on a daily basis.
I think one important notion too is that while right now they're considered not as much of a legal risk, that's starting to change. We're seeing new laws being enacted all the time. One that's getting a lot of focus right now is the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. That's one where companies have certain obligations on themselves to report about sustainability, ESG, diversity, even bribery and corruption, which is overlapping with other laws there. But when you talk about some of those other things like sustainability, ESG, etc., those are becoming not just a nice to have, but a need to have as well. So there's certainly legislation that's catching up with this in certain parts of the world. It's an area that, although it's often seen as let's get our bribery and corruption program settled first, which is probably a very prudent idea, then moving on, if there are extra resources for these other areas, I think they're just as important too. It can carry as much, if not more risk sometimes. But with that, Massimo, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners as we round out this episode?
So I'd just like to summarize, to wrap up everything, that in general, the clients, they really trust us for our experience in the industry. Also, the fact that we cover dozens and dozens of languages, so we can catch almost all the significant reputational concern all around the globe. We have experienced analysts there. They cover all this regulation that you just mentioned a couple of seconds ago. So that's why the clients usually they go with us, because they rely on us. We know the regulation, we know the languages to cover all these aspects. And of course, that's just to go on my side from the legal background perspective. Most of the clients, they're not working with that particular jurisdiction. They're not aware. For example, in Italy, you have 3 stages of trial, and we almost go with that because there are no specific limitation to appeal to the Court of Appeal and the Court of Cassation. And this is totally different, for example, from the US, that you have still a Court of Appeal and a Supreme Court, but it's really hard and tough to appeal to the second court or even to the Supreme Court. So there are different nuances that the clients may not be aware, and we can cover and explain in our reports.
It's something where we're glad to lend our expertise wherever it's useful. Even if a client is very aware of their obligations, they may not have familiarity with a particular market or just the language skills sometimes to be confident in what they're gathering to as much as they would like to be. Massimo, again, thank you very much for your expertise and time to talk about this.
Thanks for tuning in to today's podcast. If you're interested in more information like this, take a look at the additional episodes in this series, in which we discuss current and emerging trends in the compliance and third-party risk industry. You can also find additional resources on third-party risk management on our website at www.blueumbrella.com. See you next time.